from top to bottom, but because they're numbered differently. The Jewish version, what the Protestant version has is the prologue, I'm the Lord thy God. That's at the top of most of the Protestant monuments. That's actually commandment number 1 in the Jewish version. It's a matter that if it was in a paragraph, there's no difference. But they number them differently, and the courts have said that's why you can't have it. It's a huge theological debate. No, it's behavioral. It has nothing to do with theology. I don't know of anybody that debates the numbering of the 10 Commandments. Yeah. I was, well, you know, don't kill is actually not 6, it's 5, and we don't do that. Yeah. And so the courts are starting to undermine these characteristics where that we could distinguish before between theology and behavior. The court's not doing that anymore.
Understood.
They're saying, you know, oh, that comes out of a religious book. See, we've had the same trouble with teaching premarital sexual abstinence. That's gone to the courts. The court says, that's a teaching you can find in the Bible. No, you can't teach that at schools. That's unconstitutional separation of church and state. They can't make the distinction between theology and behavior, and that undermines a nation.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. The courts have had a tendency to meddle into the 10 Commandments, the biblical spiritual heritage of America, and the way that they've done it, what we're debating today, is that they have made the 10 Commandments, which is the laws of how we should govern ourselves, they've made it a theological debate.
Yeah.
Instead of letting it be behavioral.
Yeah.
Is that basically what they've done to be able to get all
that's
into
right.
it?
Our judges today would have been great in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, because that's when they debated how many angels would fit on the head of a pin.
Okay.
Who cares?
Yeah.
That doesn't change things. Our judges would have been great as part of that theological debate years ago, because they're into things that nobody cares about, nobody really believes, and it doesn't affect behavior.
Right.
It does for them. See, they have so intermeddled themselves in religious liberty issues that one of the Supreme Court justices has described the Supreme Court as a national theology board. And that's a great description. I mean, they're telling us, oh, you can't display that version of the 10 Commandments because it's numbered differently from this version. That's not what criminal prosecutions are about. I can show you hundreds, and I mean hundreds, close to 800 cases where that the courts have cited the 10 Commandments as the final issue. And they really don't care what number it is. Mm-hmm. They just say because the law says, because the 10 Commandments say thou shalt not kill, that's why you can prosecute this guy. They don't go into numbering. But suddenly this new court, in order to make things secular, gets into issues that we don't even care about. This biblical heritage was so well understood during the early years of the nation, and the writings of the numerous founding fathers were so well known, that in later years the Supreme Court ruled in the founders' intention, keeping biblical principles as the basis. For example, notice this ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1892. The court said, "No purpose of action against religion can be imputed to any legislation, state or national, because this is a religious people. This is a Christian nation." What would lead the court to conclude that we are a Christian nation? This case was not long, only 16 pages in the court records, but the court provided 87 different historical precedents to support its conclusions. The court quoted the Founding Fathers, the acts of the Founding Fathers, the acts of the Congresses, the acts of the state governments, and so on. At the end of 87 precedents, the court explained that it could continue to cite many additional precedents, but that certainly 87 were sufficient to conclude that we were a Christian nation. The fifth characteristic of a Christian nation that comes from Christians is it's a free market approach to religion. We don't believe in coercion. Matter of fact, you'll find that this Christian nation, Founding Fathers called it a Christian nation, courts called it Christian nations. We invited every other religion to come here. We had a lot of Jewish patriots involved in the American Revolution, Jews and Christians side by side. Wasn't a threat at all. We had Muslims here. One of the Founding Fathers was a Muslim. John Randolph of Roanoke was a Muslim Founding Father. Now, he got led to Christ by Francis Scott Key, who did the Star-Spangled Banner, but we had Muslims in early America, we had Buddhists, we had what were called Confucians in early, we had all these religions in early America. We were still a Christian nation. It wasn't because we tried to keep other religions out, it's because we said, you know what? We believe the presentation of truth wins every time.
Right.
We just put it out there, and we invite you to be, we're not threatened by you guys at all. You know what that is? That's like Elijah on the top of Mount Carmel.
I was just thinking that, Dave.
Exactly. You know, I have people, they say, oh, I don't want prayer back in schools. If we get prayer back in schools, I don't want my kids hearing a Buddhist pray. Well, number one, a Buddhist's not going to pray. They meditate, so you're not going to have to worry about hearing a Buddhist pray. It's not going to happen. But number two, if you're scared of that religion, you're in the wrong religion.
Right.
You ought to be in the one you're scared of. See, Elijah, when they had the false prophets on Mount Carmel, false prophets of Baal, they're praying away. He says, you want more time to pray? Take more time. Take all the time you want. Just make sure I get my shot.
Right.
You know, and that's all it boils down to. And that's the position we had in America. We're not scared of anybody else's religion. We'll let everybody come. It's a free market approach. And that's why we don't use, and we didn't use, coercion. You don't find that in Christian nations. Now, you find that in that middle 12 centuries of apostasy, forced conversions. That's still one of the fundamental tenets of Islam, is forced conversions. It is not of true Christianity.
Right.
So for 5 centuries, we've had a free market approach. Now, you take those 5 characteristics, you say, you know, I like having a Republican form of government where I choose my leaders. I really like having an institutional separation church and state where the government doesn't run the church and the church doesn't run the government. I really do like having freedom of conscience to believe what I want. And I really do like having behavioral standards that reflect certain things, even if they're in the Bible. And I really do appreciate the fact that we can choose what religion we want. Welcome to a Christian nation. Yeah. See, that's a Christian nation. That's not a theocracy. Those guys that say Christians are trying to impose theocracy, if you look at the last 5 centuries of Christianity and the time of the Reformation, every time Christians got a hold of a government, it was free choice. Choose your own. We don't do theocracies. That's not it. So what's wrong with America being called a Christian nation? Nothing. You see, what happens is, since we say we're not a Christian nation and we run from that, then it's easy to make Christians into a fringe element. Oh, it's those radicals out there. We kind of tolerate them. You know, Christian values are no longer part of mainstream. We get in trouble debating Christian values in marriage, debating Christian values in bioethics, debating Christian values. We never debated those values before. Even non-Christians among the founding fathers like Franklin and Jefferson were absolutely advocating Christian values. They may not agree with Christian theology, but who's going to have a trouble with Good Samaritan or with the Golden Rule or with the Beatitudes? Those are Christian teachings. Right. They uplift a society. So we've got to get away from being scared to say we're a Christian nation. What we've got to do is define it the right way, define it the historical way. We can't let the left steal 300 years of heritage. Right. We can't let them wipe out 300 court cases, wipe out what dozens of presidents and governors have said simply because they don't like the term. We are a Christian nation. We have been a Christian nation, and that doesn't mean anything they think it does. We're not theocratic. We're not coercive. We believe in free choice. We don't believe in any of the others. And that's what we've got to get back to doing. We don't need to be ashamed at all that we're Christians and that we believe we have a Christian nation. What we need to do is advocate those civic virtues that are the result of specific biblical teachings that have blessed all of us.